Meteorologist Patrick Pete here with you again from my home because COVID-19 has us all going through extraordinary measures to do some social distancing. Well, today I'm coming back with you as Professor Pete, wearing my professorial hat, to talk to you about another weather phenomena. We've discussed lots of different things. I don't know if you've been with us. We've talked about hail, we've talked about thunderstorms, we've talked about sea breeze, and now we're going to talk about something that's pretty interesting and something that actually piqued my interest in meteorology back when I was in third grade, and that's going to be hurricanes. So let's just hop right on into it. Going to this graphic, I want to show you how hurricanes develop. There's some basic ingredients that we need in place. Number one, we need warm ocean water. The reason for that is because of something that's called latent heat. It essentially acts as gasoline for hurricanes. So once we have the warm water, we need light upper level winds. You can kind of think of a hurricane, if you think about it as a snow cone, if you have a strong wind or your hand and you just brush your hand on the top of the snow cone, you knock some of the ice off. Essentially what happens when you have strong winds, it cuts the top of the thunderstorms off. So you want those upper level winds to be light if you want to see hurricane development. And then most importantly, you need moist air mass. If you have dry air mass, essentially it will make particles condense onto droplets, and that energy won't be used for thunderstorm development and for all of the other things that need to happen for you to see intensification. Now, the first part of this process is going to sound eerily similar to our lesson on talking about thunderstorms, because what happens, you have warm air rising and it begins to cool and you get clouds. And whenever you have enough of this rushing air, you start to get thunderstorms to develop. And that's similar to as what we've talked to you about 8 weeks ago. The only difference here is that on the ocean, whenever you have all of these winds coming from lots of different directions, there's a low pressure system that's formed at the surface, and it causes more air from the outside to rush in because there's a vacuum that's created by that low pressure center, and essentially that air wants to fill it. And when it runs into each other, there's only one other place it can go. The ocean below is blocking the air from going down, so it can only go up. So you get increased rising, and then, of course, you get taller thunderstorms. You get stronger thunderstorms, and it just continues to grow and intensify. And then eventually you get a circulation around that low pressure center. You're going to see the strong upward motion. You're going to see the air flowing in from all directions, and that kind of aids in that spin. So that's the basis of how we get a low pressure system that's in the tropics to develop. Whenever it comes to classification of these tropical systems, the first classification, well, the first one is called technically a tropical wave, which is just the low pressure system. Next, we have a tropical depression, and essentially this thunderstorm complex of thunderstorms continues to circulate, and the winds are sustained, or for 1 minute you could clock the wind speeds at 39 miles per hour or less. It has minimal impacts, and whenever we talk about hurricanes just going forward, we're talking about just purely on the winds and the water. If a system is stalled, obviously the impacts can be greater because it's pouring rain and having continuous winds over one location. So in the sense of this discussion, we're just going to talk about this system out over the water. And those impacts are going to be minimal compared to all of the other classifications. Next up, we're talking about tropical storms. Now, here is where we actually typically give the storm a name. So it'll be referred to as Tropical Storm Amber, or if it's the first one of the season, Tropical Storm April, or Adam, or Alex. But essentially you have more of this system intensifying. The winds get a little bit stronger. You can see on radar very clearly that normally this is rotating in a well-defined one. The winds are stronger. It can cause some damage, and those winds are sustained between 39 and 73 miles per hour. And if this system continues to intensify, get stronger, the rising air starts to, you can almost kind of see the center. It's clearly defined whenever you're looking at this image. The eye may develop, but it doesn't have to develop. Those winds can cause very extensive damage. There's a different scale. It ranges from 1 to 5. We'll cover that in another one of these tutorials. But those winds, at least to be classified as a hurricane, have to be sustained at least 74 miles per hour. Now, these storms don't stop there. They can intensify. And we typically classify a hurricane as a major hurricane if it's a Category 3 or greater storm. That means those winds are sustained at 115 miles per hour almost always you're going to see an eye. The only time you don't see an eye in a major hurricane is typically when it's going through an eye wall replacement cycle. Whenever it's typically weakening, and if it's over water in a favorable environment, it will re-intensify. But these are extremely powerful storms. They can be devastating or catastrophic depending on where they make landfall, just on the wind alone. But typically, whenever these storms have strong winds, you actually see a higher surge because those winds are beating up against the water, and as it's beating up against the water, it's causing waves, and it's causing rushing motion away from the center. So essentially those wave heights are going to be high. That means the surge is going to be high. And depending on the land that it makes landfall at, depending on the elevation, you can see a surge cause nominal impacts, or it can be detrimental. And all you have to do is look at all of the major hurricanes that have made landfall on the East Coast and on the Gulf Coast. Obviously, a lot of the places on the Gulf Coast have lower elevations, but you have places like Miami also at a pretty low elevation. So all of these things come into context. We can come back to me for a closing here. I just want to let you guys know hurricanes are very interesting because we're coming up on hurricane season within the next 30 days. We're already watching the tropics because technically the season starts on June 1st, but we've seen tropical systems develop well before that. So we're going to keep you abreast of all of the tropical systems that develop out in the Atlantic. If you have any questions, you can always feel free to comment, send me a message. Follow me, WX Pete, our chief meteorologist, Lynette Charles, or you can also follow Sabrina. We're going to keep you guys informed on everything that's happening in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. Y'all have a good day. Stay safe. And remember to wash your hands.